useless, Dad. You can't even show up on time for one dinner." That's what my daughter said on her 30th birthday, while everyone else at the table tried to laugh it off. My name is Richard Conway. I'm 71, from Boston. And that voice, sharp, embarrassed, a little too loud, belonged to my only child, Emily. It was a fancy waterfront restaurant, the kind where napkins come folded like origami and nobody raises their voice. Except she did. I'd arrived 8 minutes late. Traffic, parking, age, take your pick. When I walked in, she was already cutting her cake. I stood at the edge of the table with her gift in my hands, wrapped clumsily in paper I'd reused from Christmas. She looked at it, then at me. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said flatly. Then she turned to her friends. "Dad's always trying, bless him. But he's kind of retired from being useful." Laughter rippled across the table, polite, confused laughter, like no one wanted to be part of that sentence, but didn't know how to step out of it. I smiled, nodded, and pulled out the chair at the end of the table. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. Her boyfriend leaned in, whispering something I couldn't hear. She rolled her eyes and waved for the waiter to refill her glass. There was a time when birthdays meant flour on the counter, cheap candles, and me holding the camera while she blew out her wish. I used to hide her presents under her pillow. Tiny things. A bracelet, a book, once even a used guitar I'd restored myself. She'd light up like the whole world had handed her a sunrise. Now she barely looked up from her phone. When the cake came around, I reached for a slice, but one of her friends, a tall guy with perfect teeth, said quietly, "This one's for family first." I said, "It's okay." But the waiter whispered, "Sir, I saved you one." I set my fork down and waited my turn. The restaurant music played something soft and slow, the kind my wife and I used to dance to in our kitchen before Emily was born. For a second, I could almost hear my wife's voice. "Don't make a scene, Rich. Just breathe. She'll find her way back." I breathed. When the plates were cleared, Emily stood up for a toast. "Here's to new beginnings," she said, smiling at her friends. "To success, to independence, and to people who don't hold us back." Everyone clapped. I didn't. I just watched the candles flicker against her face, saw the girl I'd raised and the stranger she'd become blur together. After dessert, I quietly placed her gift, a small wooden box wrapped in gold ribbon, on the corner of the table. She didn't even notice. When I stood to leave, no one stopped me. I took my coat, nodded to the waiter, and walked out into the cold Boston night. Outside, the harbor wind smelled of salt and engines. I walked slowly along the water, hands in my pockets. Something crinkled, the torn gold ribbon from her gift bag. I must have picked it up without realizing. I held it tight as I looked back at the restaurant windows glowing warm against the dark. Inside, I could see her laughing again, the crowd leaning in, glasses raised. "Useless," I whispered to myself. The word hurt less in my voice than it did in hers. The ribbon fluttered in my palm like something alive before I folded it carefully and tucked it into my coat pocket. Maybe one day she'd know what was inside that box. But that night, I just kept walking. The next morning, the leftover chill from that night still clung to my chest. I woke up before sunrise, old habits from my years as a delivery driver, and found myself staring at the wrapped box on the counter. The gold paper had a small crease where her fingers might have touched it before setting it aside. I'd spent a week sanding that box, polishing the hinges, lining the inside with the soft blue cloth her mother loved. I'd planned to give it to Emily at the end of dinner, after the candles, after the laughter. Not as a gift, but as a bridge. Instead, I walked home alone with it under my arm, like a secret that didn't want to exist. Boston Harbor was quiet that night, only the hum of boats in the distance and the faint echo of music from the restaurant. I remember passing a young couple taking selfies under the streetlight. The girl laughed, the same kind of carefree laugh Emily used to have when she was little, and I swung her around in the yard pretending she could fly. Back then, she'd say, "Don't let go, Daddy." And I never did, not until she let go first. That morning, I made coffee and tried to eat, but every bite tasted like guilt. Maybe I had failed her somewhere along the line. Maybe love had become too quiet to be noticed. Around noon, I decided to walk back to the restaurant, tell them to give the leftovers to the staff. When I arrived, they were cleaning up from another party. The same young server from the night before recognized me. "Hey," she said gently, "you were at the birthday, right? The one with the sparklers?" I nodded. She hesitated, then handed me a small white box. "I saved you a slice of cake. You left before they passed it out." It was chocolate, her favorite as a kid. I used to make it every year, never as perfect as this one looked. I thanked the girl and sat outside on the bench facing the water, watching the gulls fight over crumbs near the pier. I opened the box but couldn't bring myself to eat it. The frosting smelled too much like memory. Instead, I reached into my wallet and took out an old photo. Emily was 6, missing 2 front teeth, paper crown crooked on her head, frosting on her cheeks. I'd worked 3 shifts that week to afford that birthday. Her mother had made the cake, I'd made the decorations. We had nothing, but that little girl thought she had everything. I smiled at the picture, then folded it back carefully. The wind picked up, tugging at my coat. The harbor water glittered silver in the sunlight. I thought about calling her, maybe just to ask if she liked the gift. But I knew she hadn't opened it, maybe never would. And something about forcing it felt wrong. Love, I've learned, doesn't need to beg for a seat at the table. As I stood to leave, I noticed something on the ground, a napkin from the restaurant, scribbled on the corner in her handwriting. Probably a note she'd tossed when planning her toast. It read, "To independence, to freedom." I held it for a moment, then let it go. The wind took it, spinning across the boardwalk until it disappeared over the water. By the time I reached home, the cake box still untouched in my hand, the phone buzzed with a new message. It was from her. "Dad, please don't just show up at my place anymore. I need space. Hope you understand." I didn't reply. I just set the cake in the fridge beside the half-empty milk and stood there, staring at the quiet hum of the light. "Space," she said. I'd given her a lifetime of space, everything between my hands and hers. But maybe this time, it was her turn to fill it. 2 days later, I heard the knock. Not the kind you rush to answer. Short, professional, practiced. When I opened the door, a courier in a blue jacket handed me a padded envelope and asked for my signature. It was light. No return address except a small label with my daughter's name. Inside, there was a spare key, the one I'd given her years ago when she first moved into her apartment. Attached to it was a folded note. "Dad, please don't use this anymore. Mark says we need boundaries. It's better this way." The words were neat, polite, and cold. At the bottom, she'd drawn a tiny heart, like an afterthought she almost deleted. I stood there in my hallway for a long time, staring at that key. It had been mine once, hanging next to her mother's house key on a ring we kept in the kitchen drawer. After her mother passed, I'd given it to Emily. "So you can always come home," I'd said. Now it was coming back to me. I placed it on the table beside the unopened slice of cake, which had started to dry around the edges. The frosting had darkened, just like the air in that apartment. Too quiet, too heavy. I wanted to call her, ask what I'd done wrong. But there's a point where even a father knows the sound of his own voice won't help. So I folded the note and set it next to her key. The next morning, another message appeared, this time from her boyfriend. "Mr. Conway, Emily and I are adjusting to some new boundaries. We'd appreciate it if you could respect our space. Also, please confirm you've received the documents we sent for acknowledgement." Documents. I checked the mailbox. Another envelope, heavier this time, stamped by a law office downtown. Inside was a short agreement asking me to confirm that I wouldn't interfere with any personal, financial, or property matters relating to Emily Conway or her partner. It didn't accuse me of anything. It just erased me cleanly, like a line drawn through an old name. I sat in my recliner, the paper trembling in my hands. My reflection in the TV screen looked tired, older than I'd felt just a week ago. I poured myself some tea and stared at the words acknowledge and agree. I could hear my wife's voice again, the one that still visits when the house is too quiet. "Don't let pride speak first, Rich. Listen before you answer." I didn't sign. That night, I walked to her building. Her apartment lights were on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. I thought about ringing the bell, but the key in my pocket stopped me. Instead, I left it on her welcome mat, wrapped in a small square of paper that said only 3 words: "Always your home." When I turned to leave, the street light flickered, and I noticed a small white slip near my foot, a postal notice with my name on it. P.O. Box renewal reminder. I hadn't opened that box in over 10 years, not since her mother passed. The paper felt strangely warm in my hand, like something waiting to be remembered. Maybe there was a reason it showed up now. I tucked it into my wallet and walked back home, the night air cutting but clear. Somewhere deep down, a quiet thought stirred. Maybe love doesn't end when it's pushed away. Maybe it just changes where it waits. The next morning, the light hit the corner of the living room where my wife's old desk sat, untouched for years. Dust softened its edges, the way time does with things we're afraid to face. I made coffee, sat down in front of it, and just stared. That desk had been hers since college, oak with a drawer that always stuck halfway. She kept everything in there: grocery lists, birthday cards, half-finished letters she never sent. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to open it again. But that P.O. box slip kept tugging at me. It was from a downtown branch, one we'd used for something important, though I couldn't remember what. The box number looked familiar, like a voice from another life. I took a deep breath and pulled the drawer open. It groaned like it hadn't been touched in a decade. Inside were envelopes, pens, and a thin layer of dust that smelled faintly of old paper and perfume. Underneath a stack of letters, I found a small wooden box I didn't recognize. I wiped it clean with my sleeve. On top, in my wife's handwriting, were the words, "For Emily, her 30th birthday." My chest tightened. Her 30th. That was 2 nights ago. I opened the box carefully. Inside was a small tape recorder, one of those pocket-sized ones from the early 2000s. And next to it, a sealed envelope. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, addressed simply, "Richard." open when she forgets. I just sat there, holding it, feeling the weight of the years between then and now. My hands shook as I slid my thumb under the flap. The letter inside was short, written in her familiar slanted handwriting. Rich, if you're reading this, it means our little girl's grown and you're trying your best to keep up. Don't get angry if she forgets what we gave her. The world teaches pride before it teaches gratitude. When the time's right, open the P.O. box. It holds what's meant for her, but only when your heart says she's ready. I read it 3 times, each word hitting harder than the last. She must have written it during her treatments, when we both pretended we'd have more time. I reached for the recorder, pressed play, and a soft click filled the room, followed by her voice. If you're listening, she said, I'm probably gone. I just wanted to say thank you, Rich, for keeping the promise, for saving what we couldn't give her when we were gone. She'll understand someday. Maybe not now, but someday. Don't lose faith in her. Then silence. Just a faint hum, like the ghost of a heartbeat. I sat there for a long time, tears I hadn't planned sliding down my face. The P.O. box key was taped to the back of the recorder. I peeled it off gently, feeling the cool metal against my palm. Whatever my wife had hidden there, whatever she'd saved, it wasn't money that mattered. It was intention. I placed the recorder and letter back into the wooden box, then tucked the key into my wallet. For the first time in days, I felt a direction forming in my chest. Not revenge, not pride, just purpose. Tomorrow, I'd drive downtown and open that box. Whatever waited inside, it was time to remember what my wife believed in, and maybe remind our daughter too. The next afternoon, I took the train downtown. The P.O. box key felt small in my hand, but it carried the kind of weight that sits behind your ribs, not in your pocket. The post office was quiet, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of paper dust. I walked down the long aisle of metal boxes, past numbers that meant nothing to anyone but the people who used to wait for letters there. My box was number 614. I hadn't seen it since my wife handled everything. The key slid in perfectly, like time hadn't passed at all. When I turned it, something clicked open inside me as well. Inside the box was a single thick envelope, sealed and wrapped with a red ribbon. The handwriting on the front made my knees weaken. For Emily, on her 30th birthday. Love, Mom and Dad. I took it to one of the wooden benches, my hands trembling. The air smelled faintly of polish and ink. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear anything. Inside were several sheets of paper, some printed, some handwritten. The first was a letter from my wife. If our girl is reading this, it means we've kept our promise. Rich, I know you'd never brag, so I'll do it for you. This is the fund you built for her. Not as money to spend, but as a way to give what we never had. It's a scholarship in her name for kids from her old school who can't afford college. Let her see what her childhood gave back to the world. My breath caught. I unfolded the other papers, confirmation letters, bank forms, and a list of the students who had already received it. 5 names. 5 young people whose futures had quietly carried our daughter's name. At the bottom was one more note, written in my wife's small, graceful hand. When she's ready, tell her she's been helping others all along. That's her real inheritance. I sat there a long time, staring at the papers, feeling both proud and hollow. All these years, I'd kept the fund alive without ever telling Emily. I'd made small deposits each month, sometimes skipping my own bills to make sure it grew. It wasn't much, not enough to make the news, but enough to make a difference for those 5 kids. And she had no idea. I pictured her sitting at that fancy birthday dinner, calling me useless, while the world quietly held proof that her name meant something, that her mother's dream had already come true. I folded everything carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and tied the ribbon again. When I left the post office, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. I looked up at the pale Boston sky and whispered, "You planned this, didn't you, love?" The wind blew just enough to make me smile. I knew then what my next step had to be. Not anger, not defense, just truth, offered once, simply, and without demand. My wife had left the gift. I was just the messenger. I called her the next morning. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Emily," I said, "can we talk? Just for a few minutes." There was a pause, then a careful sigh. "Dad." "Okay, come by after lunch. Mark will be here too." I thanked her and hung up. The envelope from the post office sat on the table beside me, tied again with that red ribbon. I thought about wrapping it. But no, some truths don't need wrapping. When I reached her place, she opened the door halfway, hair still damp from a shower, phone in hand. "Hey," she said, guarded but not cruel. "You look tired." "I've been worse," I said with a smile. Her husband appeared from the kitchen, polite but distant. "Richard, good to see you." He gestured toward the living room like it wasn't his idea. We sat across from each other, them on the couch, me in a chair that looked too expensive to lean back in. The air smelled like coffee and new furniture, both unfamiliar in their own way. I placed the envelope on the table. "Before you say anything," I said softly, "I'm not here to argue. I just want to give you something your mother left behind." Her expression changed, confusion mixed with hesitation. She reached for the ribbon, then stopped. "Mom?" I nodded. "She made me promise to give it to you when you turned 30. Her husband leaned forward slightly, curious. "What is it?" I didn't answer. I just watched as Emily untied the ribbon and opened the first page. Her eyes moved slowly, reading each line like it might vanish if she blinked. When she reached her mother's letter, her lips parted. "A scholarship?" she whispered. "In my name?" "Yes," I said. "Your mother's idea. I just kept it going. Kids from your old school, 5 so far. They never knew it came from us." She stared at me, eyes shining but unsure whether to cry. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your mom wanted you to believe in your own strength," I said quietly. "She wanted you to think everything you built was yours. We thought pride might carry you farther than gratitude." Her husband leaned back, speechless. Emily looked down at the list of names. "They sent letters," she murmured, "thanking me." "They thanked the name you gave them," I said. "And that's enough." The room went still. You could almost hear the sound of her walls cracking. The kind pride doesn't repair quickly. Finally, she said, "Dad, It's all right," I said before she could finish. "I know you didn't mean what you said that night. Sometimes love gets lost under the noise." She blinked hard, tears caught in her lashes. "You always make me feel small when you don't fight back." I smiled faintly, maybe because I stopped needing to win. She reached across the table, fingertips brushing the envelope, then my hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." I didn't answer. Some moments don't need words. They just need to last long enough to count. When I stood to leave, I told her, "Your mom wanted you to have this, but I think she'd be happier knowing you opened it yourself." She nodded, still holding the papers close like they might disappear. As I reached the door, she said softly, "Dad?" I turned. "I kept the box you gave me," she said. "I opened it this morning." I smiled. Good. It wasn't useless after all. Then I walked into the cool afternoon air, the sound of the door closing behind me both gentle and final. That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn off the light. The apartment felt lighter somehow, but emptier too, the way silence sounds after a long storm. I sat by the kitchen window, the Boston skyline flickering faintly in the distance, and took out an old notebook I hadn't opened in years. The cover was cracked leather, a gift from my wife on our 10th anniversary. Inside were pages of handwritten numbers, notes, and memories. Our life ledger, she used to call it. Every bill, every savings goal, every hope scribbled in her looping pen. I turned to the last entry she'd written before she passed. "Promise me you'll keep building something for her, even if she forgets who built it." I ran my fingers over those words until the ink felt warm again. On the table lay the small recorder from her desk. I pressed play, not because I needed to hear her voice again, but because I needed to feel it. Her laugh filled the room first. Faint, tired, but still the same melody I'd fallen in love with. "If he's playing this," she said, "it means he's sitting in that ugly brown chair and thinking too much." I smiled despite myself. Then her voice softened. "Rich, you always said love was about showing up. Well, you did. If she forgets that, it's just because she's still finding her way back to herself. Let time do the talking. You don't have to." The tape clicked off. I poured a glass of water, then reached for the envelope I'd written earlier, the one addressed to Emily but never sent. I read it once more under the lamplight. "M, your mother believed that love was a quiet thing, not the kind that shouts in public or demands to be thanked. She believed in the kind that fixes what's broken before anyone notices it was broken at all. I guess I took after her. I don't need you to be sorry. I just need you to be okay. And if you ever start to doubt what you came from, look for the kids who carry your name. They'll remind you of a..." I signed it simply, Dad. Then I slipped the letter into an envelope, sealed it, and placed it beside my wife's wedding ring. The gold band still slightly bent from years of wear. The two looked right together, as if the story wasn't finished yet. Outside, a light rain began to fall. The sound was gentle, almost rhythmic, like her heartbeat had found its way into the weather. I leaned back in the chair and let the quiet wrap around me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel useless. I felt done. Not empty, just finished with the part that belonged to me. I'd given her the truth, the gift, and the space. The rest wasn't mine to control anymore. Still, before I went to bed, I turned the recorder back on and whispered into it softly. "She opened it, love. She knows now." Then I pressed stop. I woke up before dawn, same way I have for years. The world was still dark outside, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for something to begin. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The same spot where I'd once helped Emily with her homework, where my wife and I used to plan every tomorrow like it would always come. The gift box was gone now, the letter mailed, the scholarship records back in her hands where they belonged. All that was left on the table was the small folded piece of ribbon, gold from her birthday, and the soft hum of the refrigerator. It had been a week since I last saw her. No calls, no texts. But I wasn't angry. For the first time in years, I felt like the silence wasn't punishment. It was just space. Maybe the kind she actually needed this time. I thought about that night at the restaurant, her laughter, The look on her face when she said those words, "You're useless, Dad." I can still hear it, clear as glass breaking. But I can also hear the way her voice trembled when she opened the envelope later, the one her mother had written, the one that told her who she really was. That's what love does, I think. It stays standing, even when it's told to sit down. I looked out the window at the thin line of sunrise crawling over the city rooftops. The sky was pale pink, the same color as the frosting I used to spread on her birthday cakes when she was a kid. She'd sneak a finger into the bowl, grin at me, and say, "Don't tell Mom." And I never did. Some memories never lose their taste. Now I'm sitting here, talking to whoever's listening. Maybe to remind myself I still have a voice. Maybe to remind someone else that love doesn't vanish when people forget to see it. I'm Richard Conway, 71. Father to one daughter who once called me useless on her birthday, and who now knows what I left behind for her. I didn't give her wealth. I gave her meaning. I gave her something that would outlive both of us. But now I find myself wondering, what should I do next? Should I step back quietly and let her find her way, trusting that time and truth will do the healing? Should I forgive her openly, call her, and tell her none of it ever changed what I feel? Or should I draw a line, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, a boundary that says, "I love you, but I won't be your shadow anymore"? I've lived long enough to know love doesn't always look like staying. Sometimes it looks like standing still until the other person remembers how to walk back home. So tell me, what should I do? Because even after everything she said and everything she forgot, I still love her. And maybe that's the hardest part to live with.